A long and ex- Chapter 1. A long expected party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years. Ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return, the riches he had brought back from his travellers had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90, he was much the same as at 50. At 99, they began to call him well preserved, but unchanged would have been nearer the mark. There were some that shook their heads and thought it was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess, apparently, per- perpetual youth as well as reputedly exhaustible wealth. It will have to be paid for, they said. It isn't natural, and trouble will come of it. But so far, trouble had not come, and as Mr. Baggins was generous with his money, most people were willing to forgive him his oddities and his good fortune. He remained on his visiting terms with his relatives, except, of course, the Sackville Bagginses, and he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends until some of his younger cousins began to grow up. The eldest of these, and Bilbo's favorite, was young Frodo Baggins. When Bilbo was 99, he adopted Frodo as his heir and brought him to live at Bag End, and the hopes of the Sackville Bagginses were finally dashed. Bilbo and Frodo happened to have the same birthday, September 22nd. "You had better come and live here, Frodo my lad," said Bilbo one day, "and then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together." At that time, Frodo was still in his twins, as the Hobbit called the irresponsible 20s between childhood and coming of age at 33. 12 more years passed. Each year the Baggins had given very lively combined birthday parties at Back End, but now it was understood that something quite exceptional was being planned for John. Bilbo was going to be 111, a rather curious number and a very respectable age for a hobbit. The old took himself and only reached 113, and Frodo was going to be 33, an important number, the date of his coming of age. Tongues began to wag in Hobbiton and Bywater, and rumour of the coming event travelled all over the Shire. The history and character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became one again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found their reminiscence in welcome demand. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamagee, commonly known as the Gaffer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn on the Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he had tended the garden at Bag End for 40 years, and had helped the Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff in the joints, the job was mainly carried on his youngest son, Sam Gamagee. Both father and son were on very friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They live on the hill itself, in number 3 Bagshot Road just below Bag End. A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo. As I have always said, the gaffer declared with perfect truth, for Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hamfast, and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables in the matter of roots, especially potatoes. The gaffer was recognized as the leading authority by all in the neighborhood, including himself. "But what about this Frodo that lives with him?" asked old Noakes of Bywater. "Baggins is his name, but he is more than half a Brandybag, they say. It beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton should go looking for a wife away there in Backland, where folks are so care. And no wonder they are care, but in that is Dwarfos, the gaffer's next door neighbor. If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River, and right again the old forest, that's a dark, bad place, if half the tales be true." "You're right, Dad," said the gaffer. "Not that the Brandybucks of Bagland live in the old forest, but they are a care-bred, seemingly. They fool about with boats on the big river, and that isn't natural. Small wonder that trouble came of it, I say. But be that as it may, Mr. Frodo is as nice a young hobbit as you could wish to meet. Very much like Mr. Bilbo and in more than looks. After all, his father was a Baggins. A decent, respectable hobbit was Mr. Drogo Baggins. There was never much to tell of him, till he was drowned." "Drowned?" said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumors before, of course, but hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again. "Well, so they say," said the gaffer. "You see, Mr. Drogo he married poor Miss Primula Barandibak. She was Mr. Bilbo's first cousin on the mother's side, her mother being the youngest of the old Chuck's daughters, and Mr. Drogo was his second cousin. So Mr. Frodo is his first and second cousin. Once removed either way, as the saying is, if you follow me, and Mr. Drogo was staying at Brandy Hall with his father-in-law, old Master Gorbadoc, as he often did after his marriage, him being partial to his victuals, and old Gorbadoc keeping a mighty generous table. And he went out boating on the Brandywine River, and he and his wife were drowned, and poor Mr. Frodo only a child and all. I have heard they went on the water after dinner in the moonlight," said old Noakes, "and it was Drogo's weight that shrank the boat." "And I heard she pushed him in, and he pulled her in after him," said Sandyman the Hobbiton Miller. "You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman," said the gaffer, who did not much like the miller. "There isn't no call to go a talking of pushing and pulling. Both are quite tricky enough for those that still without looking further for the cause of trouble. Anyway, there was this Mr. Frodo left an orphan and stranded, as you might say, among those black backlanders, being brought up anyhow in Brandy Hall, a regular warren by all accounts. Old Maester Gorbadoc never had fewer than a couple of hundred relations in this place. Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed than when he brought the lad back to live among decent folk. But I reckon it was a nasty shock for those Sackville Bagginses. They thought they were going to get bad end, the time when he went off and was thought to be dead, and then he comes back and orders them off, and he goes on living and living, and never looking a day older, bless him. And suddenly he produces an heir, and as all the papers made out proper, the Sackville Bagginses won't never see the inside of Back End now, or it is to be hoped not. There is a tiddy bit of money tracked away, but there's a tiddy bit of money tracked away up there, "I hear tell," said the stranger. "A visitor on business from Makel delivering in the West Falcon. All the top of your hill is full of tunnels, baked with cheese of gold and silver and jewels, by what I have heard." "Then you have heard more than I can speak to," answered the gaffer. "I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Bilbo is free with his money, and there seems no lack of it. But I know of no tunnel making. I saw Mr. Bilbo when he came back a matter of 60 years ago. When I was a lad, I had not long come prentice to old Holman, him being my dad's cousin, but he had me up at back end helping him to keep folks from trampling and trapping all over the garden while the sale was on. And in the middle of it all Mr. Bilbo comes up the hill with a penny and some mighty big bags and a couple of chests. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt they were mostly full of treasure. He had picked up in a foreign parts. When there be mountains of gold, they say, but there wasn't enough to fill tunnels. But my lad Sam will know more about that. He's in a He's in and out of back end, crazy about stories of the old days he is, and he listens to all Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo has learned him his letters, meaning no harm, mark you, and I hope no harm will come of it. Elves and dragons, I say to him, cabbages and potatoes are better for me and you. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you will land in trouble too big for you. I say to him, they might say it to others, and might say it to others, he added with a look at the strange and the miller. But the gaffer did not convince his audience. The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed in the minds of the younger generation of hobbits. "Oh, but has likely enough been added to what he brought at first," argued the miller, voicing common opinion. "He's often away from home, and look at outlandish folk that visit him, dwarfs coming at night, and that old wandering conjurer Gandalf, and all. You can say what you like, Gaffer, but Bag End's a care place, and its folk are carer. And you can say what you like about what you know no more than you do of boating," Mr. Sandyman retorted the gaffer, disliking the miller even more than usual. "If that's being care, then we could do with a bit more careness in these parts. There is some not far away that wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls, but they do things proper at Bag End. Our Sam says that everyone's going to be invited to the party, and there is going to be presents, mark you, presents for all this very month as is. That very month was September, and as fine as you could ask, a day or two later a rumor, probably started by the knowledgeable Sam, was spread about that there were going to be fireworks. Fireworks, what is more, such as had not been seen in the Shire for high on a century, not indeed since the old Chuck dies, died. Days passed, and the day drew nearer. An old-looking wagon laden with an odd-looking packages rolled into Hobbiton one evening and toiled up the hill to Back End. The startled hobbits peered out of lamplit doors to gape at it. It was driven by outlandish folk, singing strange songs, dwarfs with long beards and deep hoods. A few of them remained at Back End. At the end of the second week in September, a cart came in through Bywater from the direction of the Brandywine Bridge in broad daylight. An old man was driving it alone. He wore a tall, pointed blue hat, a long grey cloak, and a silver scarf. He had a long white beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. Small hobbit children ran after the cart all through Hobbiton, and right up the hill. It had a cargo of fireworks. As they rightly guessed, at Bilbo's front door the old man began to unload. There were great bundles of fireworks, of all sorts and shapes, each labelled with a large red J and the elf run. That was Gandalf's mark, of course, and the old man was Gandalf the wizard, whose fame in the Shire was due mainly to his skill with fire, smoke, and light. His real business was far more difficult and dangerous, but the Shire folk knew nothing about it. To them, he was just one of the attractions at the party. Hence, the excitement of the Hobbit children, J for Grant, they shouted, and the old man smiled. They knew him by sight, though he only appeared in Hobbiton occasionally and never stopped long. But neither did they nor any but the oldest of their elders had seen one of his firework displays. They now belonged to the legendary past. When the old man, helped by Bilbo and some dwarfs, had finished unloading, Bilbo gave a few pennies away, but not a single skip or cracks was forthcoming, to the disappointment of the onlookers. "Run away now," said Gandalf. "You will get plenty when the time comes." Then he disappeared inside with Bilbo, and the door was shut. The young hobbit started at the door in vain for a while, and then made off, feeling that the day of the party would never come. Inside Bag End, Bilbo and Gandalf were sitting at the open window of a small room looking out west on the garden. The late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden, snapdragons and sunflowers, nasturtiums trailing all over the top, walls being and peeping in at the round windows. "How bright your garden looks," said Gandalf. "Yes," said Bilbo, "I am very fond indeed of it, and of all that and of all the dear old Shire. But I think I need a holiday." "You mean to go on with your plan then?" "I do. I made up my mind a month ago, and I haven't changed it." "Very well. It is no good saying any more. Stick to your plan, your whole plan, mind, and I hope it will turn out for the best, for you and for all of us." "I hope so. Anyway, I mean to enjoy myself on Thursday and have my little joke." "Who will laugh, I wonder?" said Gandalf, shaking his head. "We shall see," said Bilbo. The next day more craft rolled up the hill, and still more carts. There may have been some grumbling about dealing locally, but that very week orders began to pour out of a Bag End for every kind of provision, commodity, or luxury that could be obtained in Hobbiton or Bywater, or anywhere in the neighborhood. People became enthusiastic, and they began to take off the days on the calendar, and they watched eagerly for the postman, hoping for invitations. Before long, the invitations began pouring out, and the Hobbiton post office was blocked, and the Bywater post office was snowed under, and voluntary assistant postmen were Called for. There was a constant stream of them going up the hill, carrying hundreds of polite variations on "Thank you, I shall certainly come." A notice appeared on the gate at Bag End: "No admittance except on party business." Even those who had or pretended to have party business were seldom allowed inside. Bilbo was busy, writing invitations, ticking off answers, picking up presents, and making some private preparations on his own. From the time of Gandalf's arrival, he remained hidden from view. One morning the hobbit woke to find the large field south of Bilbo's front door, covered with robes and poles for tents and pavilions. Special entrance was cut into the blank leading to the road, and wide steps and a large white gate were built there. The three hobbit families of Bagshot Row, adjoined and defiled, were intensely interested and generally invade. Old Gaffer Gamagee stopped even pretending to work in his garden. The tents began to go up. There was a especially large pavilion so big that the tree that grew in the field was right inside it, and stood proudly near one end. At the head of the chief table, lanterns were hung on all its branches. More promising still, the hobbit mind, an enormous open-air kitchen was erected in the north corner of the field. A draught of cooks from every inn and eating house for miles around arrived to supplement the dwarfs and other old folk that were quartered at Back End. Excitement rose to its height. Then the weather cooled over. That was on Wednesday, the eve of the party. Anxiety was intense. Then Thursday, September the 22nd, actually dawned. The sun got up, the clouds vanished, flags were unfurled, and the fun began. Bilbo Baggins called it a party, but it was really a variety of entertainments rolled into one. Practically everybody living near was invited. A very few were overlooked by accident, but as they turned up all the same, and did not matter, many people from other parts of the Shire were also asked, and there were even a few from outside the borders. Bilbo met the guests and additions at the new White Gate in person. He gave away presents to all and sundry. The latter were those who went out again by a back way and came in again by the gate. Hobbit gave presents to other people on their own birthdays, not very expensive ones, as a rule, and not so lavishly as on this occasion. But it was not a bad system actually. In Hobbiton and Bywater every day in the year it was somebody's birthday, so that every hobbit in those parts had a fair chance to at least one present at least once a week, but they never got tired of them. On this occasion, the presents were unusually good. The hobbit children were so excited that for a while they almost forgot about eating. There were toys the like of which they had never seen before, all beautiful and some obviously magical. Many of them had indeed been ordered a year before, and had come all the way from the mountain and from Dale, and were for real dwarf make. When every guest had been welcomed in and was finally inside the gate, there were songs, dances, music, games, and of course food and drink. There were three official meals: lunch, tea, and dinner, or supper. But lunch and tea were marked chiefly by the fact that at those times all the guests were sitting down and eating together. At, at other times there were merely lots of people eating and drinking continuously from 11 until 6:30. When the fireworks started, the fireworks were by Gandalf. They were not only brought by him but designed and made by him, and the special effects set pieces and flights of rockets were let off by him. But there was also a generous distribution of skips, crackers, backrapers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin bag barkers, and thunderclaps. They were all superb. The art of Gandalf improved with age. There were rockets like a flight of scintillating birds singing with sweet voices. There were green trees with trunks of dark smoke, Their leaves opened like a whole spring unfolding in a moment, and their shining branches dropped glowing flowers down upon the astonished hobbits, disappearing with a sweet scent. Just before they touched their upturned faces, they were fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. There were pillars of colored fires that rose and turned into eagles, or sailing ships, or a phalanx, or flying swans. There was a red thunderstorm and a shower of yellow rain. There was a forest of silver spears that sprang suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army, and came down again into the water with a haste like thunder or hot snakes. And there was also one last surprise in honor of Bilbo, and it startled the hobbits exceedingly. As Gandalf intended, the light went out, a great smoke went up, it shaped itself like a mountain seen in the distance, and began to glow at the summit. It spouted green and scarlet flames. Out flew a great golden dragon, not life-size, but terribly lifelike. Fire came from his jaws, his eyes glared down. There was a roar, and the wizard 3 times over the heads of crowd. They all ducked, and many fell that on their faces. The dragon passed like an express train, turned somersault, and buzzed over by water with a deafening explosion. That is the signal of supper, said Bilbo. The pain and alarm vanished at once, and the prostrate hobbits leaped to their feet. There was a splendid supper for everyone, that is, except those invited to a special family dinner party. This was held in the great pavilion with the tree. The invitations were limited to 12 dozen, a number also called by the hobbits one gross, though the word was not considered proper to use of people, and the guests were selected from all the families to which Bilbo and Frodo were related, with the addition of a few special unrelated friends, such as Gandalf. Many young hobbits were included and present by parental permission, for hobbits were easy-going with their children in the matter of sitting up late, especially when there was a chance of getting them a free meal. Bringing up young hobbits took a lot of provender. There were many Bagginses and Boffins, and also many Tooks and Brandybucks. There were various Grubbs, relations of Bilbo Baggins' grandmother, and various Chaps, connections of his Took grandfather, and a selection of Browses, Bolgers, Brace Vigils, Brockhouses, Godbodies, Hornblowers, and Broadfoots. Some of these were only very distantly connected, were only very distantly connected with Bilbo, and some of them had hardly ever been in Hobbiton before, as they lived in remote corners of the Shire. The Sackville Bagginses were not forgotten. Otho and his wife Lobelia were presented. They disliked Bilbo and detested Frodo, but so magnificent was the invitation card, written in golden ink, that they had felt it was impossible to refuse. Besides, their cousin Bilbo had been specializing in food for many years, and his table had a high reputation. All the 144 guests accepted a pleasant feast, though they rather dreaded the after dinner speech of their host, an inevitable item. He was liable to drag in bits of what he called poetry, and sometimes, after a glass or two, would allude to the absurd adventures of his mysterious journey. The guests were not disappointed. They had a very pleasant feast. In fact, an engrossing entertainment, rich, abundant, varied, and prolonged. The purchase of provisions fell almost to nothing throughout the districts in the ensuing weeks. But as Bilbo's catering had depleted the stocks of most storage stores, cellars, and warehouses for miles around, that did not matter much. After the feast, more or less came the speech. Most of the company were however, now in a tolerant, mode, at that delightful stage which they called filling up the corners. They were sipping their favorite drinks. They were sipping their favorite drinks and nibbling at their favorite dainties, and their affairs were forgotten. They were prepared to listen to anything and to cheer at every false stop. My dear people, began Bilbo, rising his place. Here, 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 they shouted, and he kept on repeating it in chorus, seeming reluctant to follow their own advice. Bilbo filled his place and went and stood on a chair under the illuminated tree. The light of the lanterns fell on his beaming face. The golden buttons shone on his embroidered silk waistcoat. They could all see him standing, waving one hand in the air. The other was in his trouser pockets. My dear Bagginses and Boffins, he began again, and my dear Tucks and Brandybacks and Grabs and Chaps and Barrowses and Hornblowers and Blowers, brace girdles, good bodies, broke houses, and broad feet, shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion. His name, of course, was Broadfoot, and well merited. His feet were large, exceptionally furry, and both were on the table. Broadfoot, repeated Bilbo. Also, my good Sackville Bagginses, that I welcome back at last to Bag End. Today is my 111th birthday. I am 11 today. Hurry, hurray, hurray. Many happy returns, they shouted, and they hammered joyously on the tables. Bilbo was doing splendidly. This was the sort of stuff they liked, short and obvious. I hope you are all enjoying yourselves as much as I am. Defending chair, cries of yes and no, noises of trumpets and horns, pipes and flutes, and other musical instruments. There were, as has been said, many young hobbits present. Hundreds of musical cracks had been pulled. Most of them were bore Markdale on them, which did not convey much to the most of the hobbits. But they all agreed they were marvelously crackers. The continued instrument, small, but of perfect make and enchanting tones. Indeed, in one corner some of the young Tucks and Brandybacks, supposing Uncle Bilbo to have finished, since he had plainly said all that was necessary, now got up an impromptu orchestra and began a merry tune. Master Evrard Took began to dance. Evrard Took and Miss Muriel's Brandybuck got on a table and with bills in their hands began to dance and sprinkle ring, a pretty dance, but rather vigorous. But Bilbo had not finished. Seizing a horn from a youngster near by, he blew three loud hoots, The noise subsided. "I shall not keep you long," he blew. He cried. Cheers from all the assembly. "I have called you all together for a purpose." Something in the way that he said this made an impression. There was almost silence, and no one or two of the jocks pricked up their ears. "Indeed, for three purposes. First of all, to tell you that I am immensely fond of you all, and that 11 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable habits." Tremendous outburst of approval. "I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve." This was unexpected and rather difficult. There was some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work it out and see if it come to a compliment. "Secondly, to celebrate my birthday." Cheers again. "I should say our birthday, for it is, of course, also the birthday of my heir and nephew Frodo. He comes of age and into his inheritance today." Some perfunctory clapping by the elders, and some loud shouts of "Frodo, Frodo, jolly old Frodo." From the juniors, the Sackville Bagginses scowled and wondered what was meant by coming into his inheritance. "Together we score 144. Your, member, your numbers were chosen to fit his remarkable total. One gross, if I may use the expression, no chairs." This was ridiculous. Many of his guests, and especially the Sackville Bagginses, were insulted, feeling sure that they had only been asked to fill up the required number, like goods in a package. One gross indeed, vulgar expression. "It is also, if I may have allowed, if might be allowed, what's this? It is also, if I may be allowed to refer to an ancient history, the anniversary of my arrival by barrel at Iscard on the Long Lake, though the fact that it was my birthday slipped in my memory on that occasion. I was only 51 then, and birthdays did not seem so important. The banquet was very splendid, however, thought I had a bad cold at that time, I remember, and could only say thank you very much. Thank you very much. I now repeat it more correctly. Thank you very much for coming to my little party." Obstinate, obstinate silence. They all feared that a song or some poetry was now imminent, imminent, and they were getting bored. Why couldn't he stop talking and let them drink his health? But Bilbo did not sing or recite. He paused for a moment. "Thirdly and finally," he said, "I wish to make an announcement." He spoke these last words so loudly and suddenly that everyone sat up who still could. "I regret to announce that, though, as I said, 11 years is far too short a time to spend among you, this is the end. I am going. I am leaving now. Goodbye."